Hello, English 102 Composition and Literature students. Professor Berninger coming at you with Raymond Carver's short story, A Small Good Thing. Raymond Carver, mid-20th century American writer. This story was written in 1983. Really a master of the writing about the everyday people, not necessarily everyday circumstances, and known for its nice, tight, compact prose and fairly sharp dialogue. This story, A Small Good Thing, I read all of your discussion board posts, all quite moving actually. You all felt so bad for Anne and this horrible experience of losing Scotty, and Howard as well. And most of you picked up on it that the small good thing, it comes at the end. The baker had nothing to do with the accident. The baker did not hit Scotty. Somebody always thinks that, and you know, it still hits my head once in a while, but there's no evidence of that. The baker opens up, a small good thing. The baker is just a little rehumanized. The baker is a little rehumanized at the end of the story. And we'll talk about that probably in our second segment. But the first segment, I want to talk about Anne. Anne is the main character, and Anne is someone who seeks human connection. You might not notice it when you read the story because it's well written. And you wouldn't notice it maybe in yourself or others unless you become a careful reader of literature and a careful reader of people, because after all, that's the point of studying literature. Become a better reader of fake people like Anne Weiss, and you become a better reader of real people like yourself, your friend, your lover, your enemy, your family member, your coworker, your professor, whomever. So I want to just kind of go through the plot here of the story. It's a series of Anne making or not making, actually mostly failed connections, up until the point where she does connect with the baker. Second time she is in the bake shop. First time in the bake shop, we get into her head, right? She goes up, she orders the cake. The baker was not jolly. There were no pleasantries between them. Just the minimum exchange of words, the necessary information. He made her feel uncomfortable, and she didn't like that because there's no sharing. While he was bent over the counter with a pencil in his hand, she studied his coarse features and wondered if he'd ever done anything else with his life besides be a baker. She was a mother and 33 years old, and it seemed to her that everyone, especially someone the baker's age, the man old enough to be her father, must have children who'd gone through this. There must have been that. She's in her mind, she's seeking some connection with this man, the baker, by thinking he must have kids too. But of course she does not connect with him here. It is a very perfunctory exchange. Anne is 33 years old. No author makes a character 33 years old randomly. Anybody? Why is 33 an important age in literature? Best-selling book of all time, the Bible. Jesus was 33 years old when he was crucified. So, and there is a religious element in this story, especially at the end. The baker is sitting like Jesus at the Last Supper. Anne is somewhat of a Jesus figure. She loses her son. It's not an exact allegory of Christ, but 33 years old, always think of Jesus, always thinking of sacrificing yourself for someone else's sins. So Scotty gets hit by the car, sadly, and there's a failed connection right there. The man stops, looks in the mirror, Scotty gets up, the driver keeps going. Folks, if you learn anything in this class, if you hit someone, especially a kid, you don't keep going, even if the kid is dancing a jig on the sidewalk. If you ever hit a kid or anyone with your car, you stop, call some authorities, right? Anyway. So Anne goes to the hospital, and Howard and Anne is a very interesting relationship. Anne and her husband. They're sort of not that connected. He puts his hand on the back of her hair. They do sort of connect through the shared experience of their son being in a coma, but we'll get more about that in a little bit. So the doctor comes in, Dr. Francis, and he's not really that connected with them, right? Let's see how he's doing. And he moves in. Doctor, how is he? What's the matter? Why doesn't he wake up? Anne said. The doctor was handsome, big-shouldered man. He's all right. Nothing to shout about. He could be better, I think, but he's all right. Still, I wish he'd wake up. He should wake up pretty soon. And she's like, is it a coma? Nah, let's not call it a coma. Coma schmoma. He doesn't actually say coma schmoma, but he might as well. So the doctor is kind of distant and even a little bit glib here. Now let's face it, you can't get attached to every person, nurses, doctors. You can't have a deep attachment to every patient. You'd burn out in a day. But he's sort of like, yeah, don't worry about it, right? Anne then does have this connecting moment with Howard. Anne says, I've been praying, she said. I almost thought I'd forgotten how, but it came back to me. All I had to do was close my eyes and say, please God help us, help Scotty, and then the rest was easy. The words were right there. Maybe if you prayed too, she said to him. I've already prayed, he said. I prayed this afternoon, yesterday afternoon, after you called while I was driving to the hospital. I've been praying, he said. That's good. For the first time, she felt they were in this, this trouble, together. Let me try that again. She felt they were together in it, this trouble. For the first time, she felt they were together in it, this trouble. She realized with a start that until now it had only been happening to her and to Scotty. She hadn't let Howard into it, though he was there and needed all along. She felt glad to be his wife. Now we know that they don't share a lot of everyday things, because when the baker calls on the phone, the baker says there's a cake that wasn't picked up, and Howard doesn't know anything about it. Let's take a look at this first baker phone call. If you go back and look at each of the phone calls from the baker, they definitely qualify as bad customer service, but they're not as bad as you think when you only read through the story once. The phone rings. Howard picks up the receiver. I just walked in the door. So that's what Howard says. Now the baker doesn't know Howard's son is in the hospital after being hit by a car. Baker, there's a cake that wasn't picked up. Now you should say, hello, this is the baker from the bake shop. I'm calling about a cake. He doesn't say that. He says, there's a cake here that wasn't picked up. What are you saying, Howard asked. A cake. A $16 cake. Howard held the receiver against his ear. I don't know anything about a cake. Jesus, what are you talking about? Don't hand me that. Howard hung up the phone. The baker gets hung up on the first time he calls. So the next two calls, the baker is progressively a little more rude, but he's never horrible. It's a miscommunication, a failure to connect, right? A failure to connect. All right, so we've got her failed connection with the baker, Howard's failed connection with the baker on the first phone call. The doctor is somewhat dismissive of the condition. Then we have a little connection with Anne and Howard when they're praying together. Another distant doctor comes in. And the story is just full of these missed connections. The orderlies come in to wheel Scotty away for some tests. They don't speak English. That happens, right? Especially in a lot of city hospitals. There's a barrier there. There's no connection. They're wheeling her son off who is unconscious. And she can't even talk to these people. Is it the worst thing in the world? No. But it's a failed connection. The phlebotomist comes in. I like saying the word phlebotomy. A phlebotomist is someone who draws blood. And the phlebotomist says, oh, he's a sweetie. Why won't we, so the phlebotomist does connect a little bit, but, The doctor comes in. He still doesn't want to call it a coma, right? Then this really interesting moment. Howard convinces Anne to take a break to go home. She walks in the wrong door. She thinks it's the way to the elevator, and there's a black family sitting there, Franklin's family. Why Raymond Carver makes them black, I don't know. Maybe that's another little barrier of communication. It shouldn't be. I don't know. So Anne walks in. This family thinks that she's from the hospital, and she has news about their son who's in the operating table. And so they're like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, oh. And it's just some lady who's lost. And they're like, whatever. Of course, they have their family. They are all connected. She then tries to connect with them. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the elevator. My son's in the hospital. How can I find the elevator? Down that way, turn left. And then Anne stops and says to this family, because she just wants to connect with someone. My son was hit by a car. He's in a concussion, little skull fracture, but he's going to be okay. He's in shock now. I'm going to go home for a little while. That's too bad, the man said. He shook his head. Anne just kind of stands there. You know, I'm glad that you were all very sympathetic to her in your discussion board posts. Sometimes I'll get somebody who's rough on Anne. They call her needy. We're all needy. We all need each other, right? Her son is in a coma, hit by a car. Give the woman a break. You were all very nice to her. I'm getting all worked up here. Our Franklin is on the operating table. And finally, Anne continues to look at the girl, the supposed, probably Franklin's sister, who was watching her. And finally, she kind of gets the hint and she leaves. So she tries to connect there with Franklin's family. Gets a little bit, but not much. Now, she gets home and she does connect with, of course, Slug, the dog. Right? Dogs are great for that. Pets are great. Cat just left. Then while she's home, it's 5 a.m., the baker calls. She answers the phone. She thinks it's going to be the hospital. Yes, she answered, hello. Mrs. Weiss, a man's voice said. It was 5 in the morning. Weird time to call, right? Yes, what is it? This is Mrs. Weiss. This is she. What is it, please? Is it Scotty, for Christ's sake? Another Jesus reference. Scotty. Now the baker's standing there. He doesn't know the son's in the hospital. The baker's standing there looking at a cake that says Scotty on it. Scotty, the man's voice said. It's about Scotty. Yes, it has to do with Scotty. That problem. Have you forgotten about Scotty? He's talking about the cake. Of course, then he hangs up. That's bad customer service, right? But, $16 cake in 1983, it's a pretty expensive cake. So not good baker calling up 5 a.m. and then hanging up, but you can still see there's some serious miscommunication there. She gets back to the hospital. There's some foreshadowing. Franklin has died. That sort of predicts or foreshadows the fact that Scotty is going to die. They're going to operate on Scotty. Scotty then opens his eyes, lets out a death howl, closes his eyes, and dies. And then we have a shift in the story, and we'll pick up there in our next segment.